The corridor was silent in the way only military ships ever were, not peaceful, but controlled. A silence engineered by alloy walls, recycled air, and the quiet agreement that nothing unnecessary should exist here. The lights overhead pulsed faintly, strips of cold white and muted green running along the curved spine of the passage, guiding movement without inviting it. Ethan Cole walked alone. He had been walking alone for most of his career. Frontier postings did that to people. Remote stations, short-term assignments, and a reputation for handling difficult situations without escalating them tended to remove you from places where attachment was convenient. Earth Command liked him because he didn't panic, he listened, he adapted. He didn't ask many questions that couldn't be answered. This mission, however, had already broken several patterns. The ship was not human. The corridor wasn't designed for human comfort, either. The ceiling curved too low at the edges, the floor subtly angled in a way that forced a constant micro-adjustment in his stride. Everything about the vessel suggested it had been built for bodies slightly taller, slightly leaner, and far less forgiving of inefficiency. He reached the end of the corridor and stopped as the door ahead of him slid open without a sound. Inside waited two women. They were standing just far enough apart to feel intentional, as if the space between them had been measured and approved. The first stood closer, occupying the visual center of the room with quiet authority. Pale silver-blonde hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, catching the overhead light and reflecting it faintly. Her eyes, unnaturally vivid, glowing somewhere between teal and ice, locked onto Ethan the moment he stepped inside. She was pointing at him, not aggressively, not dramatically, just deliberately. The second woman stood a half step behind her, red hair framing a sharper, more reserved expression. Her gaze was equally focused but colder, analytical. If the first woman commanded the room, the second seemed to evaluate it, constantly adjusting invisible calculations. Both wore black armored suits contoured to their bodies, seamless plates interwoven with faint green luminescent lines that pulsed in slow synchronization with the ship itself. The suits were not decorative. They were functional, adaptive, and unmistakably advanced. This was not ceremonial attire. Ethan stopped just inside the threshold. Protocol demanded he speak first. Training suggested several opening lines, all of which dissolved the moment the blonde woman's finger remained pointed directly at his chest. "You," she said. Her voice was calm, not loud, not threatening, but it carried weight in a way Ethan had learned to respect instinctively. "Yes," he replied, because anything else felt like a mistake. The red-haired woman glanced sideways at her companion. "You're certain?" she asked, her tone clipped precise. The blonde did not look away from Ethan. "I am." A brief pause followed, the kind that usually preceded either a demand or an order. Ethan felt something shift, not fear exactly, but awareness. The room felt tighter now, like a decision had been made that did not require his consent, only his presence. "My name is Ethan Cole," he said, steadying himself with formality. "Human systems liaison, assigned to assist with." "I know who you are," the blonde interrupted. She lowered her hand slowly, though the sensation of being selected lingered uncomfortably. "You were not summoned here to explain yourself." The red-haired woman stepped forward slightly. "You were summoned because you were observed." Ethan blinked. Observed doing what? The blonde woman finally allowed herself a small shift in posture. Not relaxation, something closer to consideration. "Existing," she said. The word landed heavier than expected. Ethan hesitated. With respect, that doesn't narrow things down. Something like amusement flickered behind her eyes, gone almost as soon as it appeared. "It does," she said, "for us." The lights dimmed imperceptibly. The corridor behind him ceiling shut with a soft mechanical whisper. Ethan did not turn around. He had learned long ago that the moment you checked whether you were trapped was the moment you admitted vulnerability. The red-haired woman circled him once, slow and deliberate, her gaze tracing details he hadn't realized were visible: posture, breathing, the way his hands remained loose rather than clenched. "You didn't attempt to assert authority," she said. "You didn't ask why you were chosen. You didn't demand clarification." Ethan shrugged faintly. "I've found those things rarely improve outcomes." The blonde woman stepped closer now, close enough that the faint hum of her suit resonated against his own chest. "That," she said quietly, "is precisely why you were chosen." Ethan met her gaze, aware that whatever this was, it had already passed the point where retreat was an option. "Chosen for what?" he asked. For the first time since he entered the room, both women looked at each other. There was something unspoken there, not disagreement but confirmation. The blonde turned back to him. "For proximity," she said. The word meant nothing to him, and somehow everything. Ethan learned very quickly that proximity was not a metaphor. The room shifted around him, walls reconfiguring with smooth, organic precision. Panels slid apart and reformed, revealing a larger chamber beyond, part command center, part private quarters. The air felt different here, cleaner, calibrated, as if the ship itself had decided this was a space where fewer mistakes were allowed. The blonde woman gestured him forward without touching him. He obeyed. That, too, was noted. "My name," she said as they entered, "is Orales." She did not add a title. That omission was deliberate. The red-haired woman followed, her presence no less imposing despite her silence. When the doors sealed behind them again, she finally spoke. "I am Nix, Strategic Oversight." Ethan nodded. "Good to meet you." Nix's mouth twitched almost imperceptibly. "No, it is." Orales moved to the center of the room, where a circular console rose from the floor like a living thing responding to her presence. Lights flared to life beneath her fingertips, alien symbols cascading across the surface in elegant, unreadable patterns. "You were observed over a period of 17 standard cycles," Orales said. "Across 3 stations, 2 vessels, 1 border incident that should have resulted in armed conflict." Ethan exhaled slowly. "I wrote a report on that." "Yes," Nick said. "We read it." "That makes one of us," Ethan muttered before he could stop himself. Orales glanced back at him. He expected irritation. Instead, she looked curious. "Explain," she said. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Reports are written for people who weren't there. They smooth things out, make decisions look cleaner than they felt at the time." Nix folded her arms. "You are admitting to incomplete documentation." "I'm admitting to being human," Ethan replied evenly. "We compress chaos into something manageable. Doesn't mean the chaos wasn't real." Silence followed, not hostile, evaluative. Orales returned her attention to the console. "You stood between 2 armed delegations, without requesting backup." "I was already there," Ethan said. "Backup would have escalated things." "You allowed 1 commander to insult you publicly." "He needed to," Ethan said. He was losing control. Letting him redirect that anger at me gave him somewhere safe to put it. Nix tilted her head slightly. "You volunteered yourself as a pressure sink." "I wouldn't put it like that. But you didn't deny it." Orales turned fully toward him now. The room's lighting shifted subtly, responding to her movement. "You exhibit an anomaly," she said. "You do not prioritize your own status when calculating outcomes." Ethan frowned. "Is that unusual?" "For us," Nick said, "yes." Orales stepped closer again, her presence commanding without aggression. Up close, Ethan noticed fine details he'd missed before. The faint geometric patterns embedded in her irises, the way her breathing synced not with emotion, but with control. "You were chosen," Orales said, "because you do not seek proximity." "And yet here I am," Ethan said. "That," she replied, "is the paradox." Nix moved to a secondary console, bringing up a holographic projection that made Ethan's stomach tighten. It was him, multiple angles, different environments, station corridors, briefing rooms, a mess hall, always unguarded moments. Moments he hadn't known were being watched. "We are not predators," Nick said, reading his reaction. "Observation is not ownership." "Good," Ethan said. "Because if it were, we'd be having a very different conversation." Orales' lips curved slightly. You would be dead. He met her gaze, fair. She studied him for a long moment. You accept truths quickly. I accept reality, he corrected. Truth usually follows. Nix dismissed the projection. Your psychological profile flagged you as incompatible with standard alliance protocols. That sounds bad. It is, Nix agreed, for alliances. Orales' voice lowered, but ideal for something else. Ethan waited. He had learned the value of silence around powerful people. You were brought here, Orales said, because proximity to you does not distort your behavior. Proximity to you doesn't distort it either, Nix added. That finally unsettled him. You're saying other people react differently around you, Ethan said slowly. Yes, Orales replied. They defer, they perform, they desire. And that's a problem. For command, Nix said, yes. Orales' gaze did not waver. For me especially. Ethan's chest tightened, though he couldn't have said why. You're important, he said carefully. That is an insufficient word, Nix replied. Orales exhaled, a controlled release of tension Ethan hadn't noticed building. I am central. The word carried weight. Nix stepped back, ceding space in a way that was unmistakably intentional. Orales stood alone now, facing Ethan. You were selected, she said, to remain near me. For how long? Ethan asked. Orales considered him. Until proximity changes you, she said. Or, he prompted, her eyes locked onto his. Until you change me. Ethan swallowed. That was not a job description, that was a risk. And if neither happens? He asked. Orales smiled, soft, dangerous, and entirely unguarded. Then, she said, we will have discovered something our people have not encountered in generations. Nix reactivated the door behind him. Your quarters are adjacent, she said. You will not be confined. That's supposed to reassure me, Ethan asked. No, Nix replied. It's supposed to warn you. Orales stepped closer one final time, close enough that the hum of her suit vibrated faintly through the air between them. You were pointed at, she said quietly. Do not mistake that for chance. Ethan met her gaze, heart steady, instinct screaming. I won't, he said, but you should know I don't stay where I'm not wanted. For the first time, Orales looked genuinely surprised. Good, she said. Neither do I. Ethan discovered that being adjacent to Orales was not a logistical detail. It was an experience. His quarters were separated from hers by a single adaptive partition, translucent when inactive, opaque when privacy was required. The ship's designers had clearly intended this configuration for beings who did not fear constant awareness of one another's presence. Humans were not among those beings. The first night, Ethan slept poorly. Not because of danger, there was none, but because the ship itself seemed aware of him. Systems recalibrated softly when he moved. Lighting adjusted to his breathing. Temperature shifted by fractions of degrees without command. It was as if proximity to Orales placed him inside a living equation that now included him as a variable. He rose early, habit ingrained by years of station life, and found Nix waiting in the shared corridor space, already dressed in her armored suit. You adapt quickly, she observed. I don't like being behind, Ethan replied. Nix studied him for a moment. You already are. That would have unsettled him more if she hadn't said it so neutrally. Orales joined them minutes later. She looked different without the command interface active. Less central somehow, though no less composed. Her suit remained, but the luminescent lines were dimmer now, pulsing slowly instead of in command rhythm. Her hair was unbound, falling freely around her shoulders. Ethan realized with a jolt that this was likely how very few people ever saw her. You didn't sleep, she said. Neither did you, he replied without thinking. Nix's gaze flicked between them. Orales paused, then nodded once. Accurate. They moved through the ship together, Ethan positioned instinctively half a step behind Orales' shoulder. Not deferential, protective. He noticed Nix watching this with interest rather than disapproval. The command chamber activated as they entered, projections blooming into existence. Borders, fleets, probability matrices layered in shifting color. Ethan felt the familiar pressure of scale. Decisions here affected systems, populations, entire futures. Oralis took her place at the center. "You are here," she said to Ethan, "to observe." "Only observe?" he asked, "for now." Nix added, "Intervention will occur when it is unavoidable." "That's usually how it goes," Ethan muttered. The meeting unfolded with surgical precision. Alien commanders appeared via holographic projection, each one subtly altered in posture and tone by Oralis's presence. Ethan saw it immediately. The way their voices softened, their statements grew more performative, less honest. They were speaking to her, not with her. Oralis listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When the final report ended, silence filled the chamber. Nix waited. Ethan waited. Finally, Oralis spoke. "You are withholding variables," she said calmly. One of the commanders stiffened. "My central assessment is complete." "No," Oralis replied. "It is compliant." The distinction was lethal. The commander hesitated. "Additional projections suggest resource strain, but those outcomes are politically undesirable." Oralis's gaze hardened. "Truth is not subject to desirability." The commander bowed, chastened, and expanded the data. Ethan felt something shift inside him, not admiration exactly, but recognition. He had seen leaders like this before, rare ones, the kind who did not mistake authority for insulation. When the meeting concluded, the chamber dimmed again. Nix turned to Ethan. "Assessment." He hesitated, then spoke carefully. "They're afraid of disappointing her." Oralis looked at him. And that fear is corrupting the data," Ethan continued. "They're optimizing for approval, not accuracy." Silence followed. Nix inclined her head slightly. "Consistent with our findings." Oralis studied Ethan with renewed intensity. "You spoke without being invited." "I was invited to observe," he said. "Observation includes pattern recognition." Her lips curved faintly. "It does." They moved away from the chamber into a quieter section of the ship where the hum softened, the lights warmer. "You disrupt equilibrium," Oralis said suddenly. Ethan blinked. "I'm standing still." "Not physically," she replied. Nix stopped walking. "He introduces asymmetry." "That's bad?" Ethan asked. "For systems," Nix said, "often." "For evolution," Oralis added, "necessary." They reached a viewing port overlooking open space. Stars stretched endlessly beyond the hull, distant and indifferent. Oralis stood close now, not touching but present in a way that made distance meaningless. "You do not treat me as central," she said quietly. "I treat you as accountable," Ethan replied. "There's a difference." Her eyes narrowed, not in anger but focus. "Others see my position," she said. "You see my function." "And your cost," he added. That landed. Oralis turned toward the stars. "Say that again." "Being central isolates you," Ethan said evenly. "Everyone orbits. No one collides, no friction, no honesty." Nix watched carefully, ready to intervene. Oralis did not react immediately. Then slowly she exhaled. "You are dangerous," she said. "I've been told," Ethan replied softly. "Not because you threaten me," she clarified, "but because you remain unchanged near me." Ethan met her gaze. "That wasn't intentional." "That," Oralis said, "is the most concerning part." She stepped back, creating space with deliberate effort. "You will continue," she said. "Remain near, observe, speak when silence would be dishonest." Nix tilted her head. "And if honesty destabilizes command?" Oralis answered without hesitation. "Then command deserves destabilization." Ethan felt a chill, not fear but gravity. This wasn't proximity anymore. This was influence. And for the first time since he'd been pointed at, Ethan understood the risk wasn't what this position might do to him. It was what he might do to her. The first fracture appeared 46 hours later. Ethan noticed it before anyone else, not because he was smarter, but because he wasn't supposed to belong. Outsiders see stress lines in systems the insiders mistake for structure. It began during a routine fleet synchronization briefing. Oralis stood at the center of the command chamber, her presence once again pulling the room into alignment. Nix monitored peripheral channels, eyes flicking between data streams with predatory efficiency. Commanders spoke. Data flowed. Everything appeared functional, too functional. Ethan felt it in the rhythm. The answers came too quickly. The pauses were rehearsed. The uncertainty that should have existed, given the complexity of the maneuver, had been smoothed away. He waited. He always waited. Then one commander made a mistake, a small one. He adjusted a projection mid-sentence, correcting a trajectory vector without being asked. Orales' head tilted almost imperceptibly. Nix caught it at the same time Ethan did. "You changed the model," Orales said calmly. "Yes, central," the commander replied. "The original projection underestimated." "You changed it," she repeated, "because you anticipated my response." The chamber went still. The commander hesitated. "I sought efficiency." "No," Orales said, "you sought approval." The word landed like a blade placed gently on skin. Nix leaned forward. "State the original risk assessment." The commander's shoulders tightened. 32% probability of cascade failure. "And the revised model?" Nix asked. 12. Silence. Orales did not raise her voice. She did not display anger. "That was far worse. You removed 20% uncertainty," she said, "not by analysis but by expectation." The commander bowed deeply. "I believed clarity would serve command." "But clarity built on distortion," Orales replied, "is deception." Ethan spoke before he could stop himself. "They're not lying," he said. Every gaze in the chamber snapped to him. Nix's eyes sharpened. "Explain." "But they're compensating," Ethan continued, steady despite the sudden focus. "Your presence compresses uncertainty. People think ambiguity is failure around you, so they erase it." Orales turned toward him slowly. "You are excusing misconduct." "No," Ethan said. "I'm identifying cause." Nix's jaw tightened. "Careful." Ethan didn't look at her. "If you punish him, you'll treat the symptom, not the system." Orales studied him for a long moment. Then she did something no one expected. "Dismissed," she said. The chamber cleared in seconds, commanders vanishing from projection one by one, relief and confusion radiating through the air. When only the three of them remained, the room felt larger and more dangerous. Nix spoke first. "You undermined authority." Ethan met her gaze. "I protected it." Orales raised a hand, stopping Nix before she could respond. "You changed the flow," Orales said to Ethan. "Again." "You asked me to speak when silence would be dishonest," he replied. "That was dishonest silence." Her eyes searched his face, not for defiance but for motive. "Others would fear this moment," she said. "I'm not others." Nix folded her arms. "That is the problem." Orales turned away, pacing slowly. The lights dimmed slightly in response, as if the ship sensed instability. "For generations," Orales said quietly, "centrality has been maintained through control, precision, the elimination of unpredictability." She stopped facing the viewport. "And now?" Nix asked. "Now," Orales replied, "unpredictability stands beside me." Ethan exhaled. "I'm not trying to destabilize you." "And yet you are," Nix said. Orales looked back at him. "Do you know what happens if command is perceived as fallible?" "Yes," Ethan said. "People stop pretending." Nix scoffed, "And chaos follows." "Or honesty," Ethan countered. Orales closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had shifted. "You will address the council," she said. Ethan froze. "The what?" "The inner council," Nix clarified. "They advise, constrain, and when necessary, correct central authority." "That's not my job." "But it is now," Orales said. Nix stepped forward. "They will challenge you, test you. Some will attempt to dismantle your credibility." "I'm human," Ethan said dryly. "That's already handled." But Orales approached him, stopping closer than before. "Not intimate, intentional. You see what others avoid," she said. "You speak what others suppress. If you stand before them, the distortion will surface." "And if it does?" Ethan asked. Orales' voice dropped. "Then I will know the corruption runs deeper than I feared." Nix watched him carefully. "This is not symbolic, this is exposure." Ethan nodded slowly. "And if I refuse?" Orales held his gaze. Then proximity has failed. The words carried weight, final but not cruel. Ethan thought of Earth, of simple postings, of safe irrelevance. Then he thought of the commander compressing truth just to survive her presence. "I'll do it," he said. Nix's expression sharpened. "You understand what you're risking." Ethan met her eyes. "I've been risking it since I didn't bow." Orales' lips curved just slightly. "Then prepare," she said. "The council convenes at next cycle." As they turned to leave, the ship's lighting shifted again, subtly, almost imperceptibly. Ethan felt it in his bones. This wasn't just about proximity anymore. It was about fracture. And once systems fracture, they either evolve or they break. The inner council chamber was older than the ship. Ethan felt it the moment he stepped inside. The architecture changed, less adaptive, more deliberate. Stone-like alloys shaped into sharp geometries, surfaces that did not respond to presence but demanded acknowledgement. This was not a room designed for efficiency. It was designed for judgment. 7 figures sat in a semicircle elevated above the central floor. Not commanders, not tacticians, custodians of continuity. Orales stood at the center, perfectly still. Nix remained a step behind her, eyes scanning micro-expressions, threat vectors, power shifts invisible to most. Ethan stood beside Orales, not behind. That alone caused the first ripple. One counselor leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. "Why is he here?" Orales did not answer immediately. "He is here," she said calmly, "because I commanded it." Another counselor tilted her head. "You have never required an external observer in council deliberations." "Correction," Orales replied. "I have never allowed one." The distinction sharpened the air. Ethan felt the weight of 7 intelligences dissecting him simultaneously. Not hostile, worse, curious. One of them spoke again. "Human, state your function." Ethan resisted the instinct to formalize. That was what they expected. "I don't have one," he said. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Nix's jaw tightened. Orales did not move. "You stand beside Central Command without function," another counselor asked. "I stand beside her," Ethan replied, "because I don't distort when I do." Silence, a dangerous one. A counselor with eyes like polished obsidian spoke next. "Explain." Ethan took a breath. "Power creates gravity. People bend around it. They adjust what they say, what they show, what they hide. I don't orbit her. I don't need to. That makes me useful." "You imply we do," the obsidian-eyed counselor said. "I'm stating physics," Ethan replied evenly. Nix shifted her weight ready. Orales raised a hand. "Continue," she said. Ethan nodded once. "Your systems assume Central Command must be insulated to remain effective. But insulation creates blindness. You've optimized stability so aggressively that you've begun mistaking silence for order." A counselor scoffed. "You overstep." "Yes," Ethan agreed, "but accurately." The temperature in the chamber dropped by fractions. "You claim corruption," another counselor said, "without evidence." "I claim distortion," Ethan corrected, "and I can show it." He gestured toward the central projection node. Nix hesitated, then activated it. Data bloomed into the air, fleet reports, risk assessments, probability curves. Ethan pointed, moving through the information with surprising fluency. "These deviations," he said, "they all move in one direction, toward reassurance, toward what Central Command wants to hear, not what reality produces." A counselor leaned forward. "You accuse our officers of incompetence." "No," Ethan said, "I accuse them of fear." That landed harder than accusation. Orales watched the council carefully now, not defensively, but intently. "You built a system where ambiguity is punished," Ethan continued. "Where being wrong is failure instead of feedback. People don't fail less, they just hide it better." The obsidian-eyed counselor turned toward Orales. "Is this what you believe?" Orales answered without hesitation. "I believe he is correct." Shock rippled openly now. "You would undermine centuries of doctrine based on the perception of a human outsider," another counselor demanded. "No," Orales said. I would question doctrine that requires blindness to survive. Silence fell again, heavier this time. Finally, the oldest counselor spoke. Her voice was slow, deliberate. If what he says is true, Central Command itself becomes a destabilizing force. Oralis inclined her head slightly. Then I must change. That was the fracture, not Ethan's words, not the data, her willingness. The council erupted, not in shouting but in overlapping objections, warnings, projections of collapse. Nix moved subtly closer to Oralis, a silent shield. Ethan didn't speak. He watched. That was when he saw it. The fear wasn't of chaos. It was of irrelevance. When the chamber finally quieted, the oldest counselor spoke again. You propose to reduce central insulation, she said, to allow uncertainty into command. Yes, Oralis replied. And you, the counselor turned to Ethan, are the vector. Ethan met her gaze. I didn't volunteer. No, she said softly, you were selected. Oralis stepped forward. He remains. For how long? The counselor asked. Oralis did not look away from Ethan when she answered. For as long as proximity remains honest. The counselors exchanged looks, calculating, unsettled. Finally, the obsidian-eyed counselor nodded once. Then we will observe. The chamber dimmed, the session ending without formal closure. As they exited, Nix exhaled slowly. You destabilized the highest authority in our civilization. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. I had a feeling that might come up. Oralis stopped walking. Nix halted instantly. Ethan turned. For a moment, Oralis did not look like Central Command. She looked like someone standing at the edge of something irreversible. You did not hesitate, she said quietly. You asked me not to, Ethan replied. Her eyes searched his, not for loyalty, not for obedience, for something else. You are no longer just adjacent, she said. Ethan's chest tightened. What am I now? Oralis stepped closer. Not touching, close enough that the air between them felt charged. You are inside the system, she said, and the system is changing. Nix watched them both. This will not end cleanly, she warned. Ethan nodded. It never does. Oralis's voice dropped. Do you regret it? Ethan thought of Earth again, of simplicity, of safety. Then he looked at her. No, he said, but I think this is where it gets dangerous. Oralis allowed herself a small, honest smile. Good, she said, so do I. The first consequence arrived quietly. No alarms, no confrontations, no dramatic rupture in command structure, just absence. Ethan noticed it during the third council-adjacent briefing after the inter-council session. 3 commanders failed to appear, not replaced, not explained. Their communication channels showed active status, but no participation requests were sent. They're waiting, Nix said when Ethan pointed it out. For what? He asked. For permission to exist incorrectly. Oralis stood at the viewport, hands clasped behind her back. The stars beyond the hull drifted slowly, indifferent witnesses to the tension coiling inside the ship. They are uncertain how to speak now, she said. Uncertainty feels dangerous to those who were trained to erase it. Ethan leaned against a console. They'll come back. Nix glanced at him. Based on what? Based on relief, he replied. It's exhausting pretending all the time. Oralis did not turn, but her shoulders shifted slightly. That was when Ethan realized something important. She was tired, not physically, not in the way that sleep could fix. This was a deeper fatigue, the kind that came from holding an entire civilization's expectations inside your spine and never letting them bend. That night, Oralis summoned him without Nix present. The room was smaller than her usual chambers. No command interfaces, no data projections, just soft ambient light and a low hum that felt almost organic. She stood near a narrow table, her armor replaced by a simpler black garment that followed the lines of her body without declaring authority. The luminescent markings were gone. You dismissed strategic oversight, Ethan said. Yes. Is that allowed? She looked at him. Do you want me to answer as Central Command? He hesitated. No, he said. I want you to answer as you. The pause that followed was longer than usual. No, she said finally. It is not allowed. Ethan exhaled. Then why? Because I needed silence, she interrupted, and because Nix would not have let it happen. That sounds like a security concern. That sounds like trust, Oralis corrected. She moved closer, stopping across from him. The air felt different without layers of command protocols between them. You altered the council, she said quietly. But that was not the greatest disruption. Ethan raised an eyebrow. I'm afraid to ask. You altered me. The words landed heavier than any accusation. I didn't mean to, he said carefully. I know, she replied. That is what makes it dangerous. She turned away, pacing slowly. For decades I have been precise, controlled, unreachable. I believed distance preserved clarity. She stopped. Now I find myself hesitating before decisions, not because I doubt the data, but because I consider the people. Ethan frowned. That sounds like improvement. For them, she said, not necessarily for me. He stepped closer. What does it cost you? She didn't answer immediately. When I allow myself to be seen, Oralis said, I feel the weight of every consequence more sharply. Failure is no longer abstract. Mistakes feel personal. Ethan nodded slowly. Welcome to leadership without insulation. Her lips curved faintly. You say that like it's survivable. It is, he said, but not alone. She turned toward him then, eyes searching his face in a way that made his chest tighten. That is the problem, she said softly. You are making proximity feel necessary. Ethan didn't move. That's not dependency, he said. That's connection. Nix's warning echoed in his memory. This will not end cleanly. Oralis stepped closer than before, not touching, not retreating. For my people, she said, connection to central command is symbolic, distant, untouchable. And for you, Ethan asked, her voice dropped, it is becoming specific. The silence between them stretched, not awkward but loaded. Ethan felt it then, the shift he'd been avoiding naming. This wasn't just influence anymore, it was attachment. We should be careful, he said quietly. Yes, she agreed. We should. Neither of them moved. That was when the room's ambient light flickered. Once, twice. Nix's voice cut through the space, sharp and immediate. Central interrupting. We have a situation. Oralis straightened instantly, command reasserting itself like armor sliding back into place. Report, she said. 3 fleet nodes have requested reassessment authority, Nix continued. Simultaneously. Ethan's brow furrowed. That's unprecedented. Yes, Nix said. They're invoking uncertainty clauses. Oralis closed her eyes briefly. Then she opened them and something in her expression hardened, not with fear but resolve. It begins, she said. Ethan met her gaze. What does? The test, she replied, of whether truth can exist near power without destroying it. Nix added, and whether proximity creates stability or fracture. Oralis looked at Ethan one last time before turning toward the door. You should not attend this, she said. Ethan didn't hesitate. I'm already part of it. She studied him, then nodded once. Then stay close, she said. But understand this. Yes, he asked. If this fails, she said quietly, they will not blame me. Ethan felt the weight of that settle into his chest. They'll blame the human, he said. No, Oralis replied. They will blame the one I allowed near. The door opened. Command lights flared to life beyond it. And as Ethan followed her into the rising tension of a system about to redefine itself, he understood something with absolute clarity. Whatever happened next would not be undone. The chamber was already alive when they arrived. Not chaotic, focused. Fleet nodes hovered in layered projections, each one pulsing softly, awaiting acknowledgement. Officers stood rigid at their stations, eyes flicking toward Oralis the moment she entered, then away again just as quickly. Ethan felt it immediately. This was different. This wasn't fear of her. It was uncertainty about her. Nix took position at the command interface, fingers moving with practiced speed. Reassessment authority requests confirmed, she said. 3 fleets, independent chains of command, all citing uncertainty clauses. Oralis stepped forward, Open the channel. The projections shifted. Faces appeared: commanders, analysts, sector leads. Not all of them were familiar. Some looked tense. Others looked relieved. The first speaker didn't wait for formal recognition. "Central Command," a female commander said, voice steady but strained. "We are requesting confirmation that uncertainty is no longer a liability." But the question was direct, dangerously so. Orales did not answer immediately. Ethan watched her posture, not rigid, not defensive. Grounded, present. "What is your assessment?" Orales asked instead. The commander hesitated. "Our models show 3 viable outcomes. None of them align cleanly with prior optimization doctrine." "And previously," Orales said calmly, "what would you have done?" The commander swallowed. "Selected the least destabilizing projection. Suppressed the rest." Ethan felt a shift ripple through the room. "And now?" Orales asked. "Now," the commander said quietly, "we believe suppression increases risk." Silence followed. Not the brittle silence of fear, the kind that waited. Orales nodded once. "Then present all 3. Nix's eyes flicked toward Ethan, sharp, questioning. He held her gaze and nodded almost imperceptibly. This was the moment. The data unfolded, complex, messy, contradictory in places. Ethan saw it immediately. No clean answers, only trade-offs. Orales studied the projections without interruption. "You are not asking me to choose," she said at last. "You are asking me to acknowledge uncertainty." "Yes," the commander replied, "and to let us operate within it." Another voice joined in. "Central permission to speak freely." "Granted, we have been wrong before," the second commander said. "But we were never allowed to say so. That silence cost lives." The words hit hard. Ethan felt the room lean inward as if the ship itself were listening. Orales inhaled slowly. "Then we will not repeat that failure," she said. "Uncertainty will be documented. Disagreement will be recorded. Suppression will no longer be rewarded." Nick stiffened. "Central, this will reduce perceived command clarity." "Yes," Orales said, "and increase operational variability." "But yes." Nix paused. "And political instability." "Yes." Orales turned fully toward the projections. "But it will also increase truth," she said, "and truth is the only stability that lasts." The chamber held its breath. Ethan felt it then, the fracture sealing into something else. Alignment. One by one the commanders bowed, not in ritual unison but individually, thoughtfully. "Reassessment authority accepted," Nix announced quietly. The projections dimmed, channels closing. The chamber was silent again. Different now. Afterward, when the officers dispersed, Nix remained still, gaze fixed on the darkened space where uncertainty had been allowed to exist. "You survived," she said finally. Orales glanced at her. "We did." Nix turned to Ethan. "They will adapt." "Eventually," he said, "and if they do." Ethan met her gaze. "Then they'll leave." Nix considered that. Acceptable losses. But Orales said nothing. They moved to the quieter observation deck once more. The stars felt closer tonight, less distant, less indifferent. "You changed the tone of command," Nix said to Orales. "Irreversibly." "Yes," Orales replied. Nix turned to Ethan. "And you?" He raised an eyebrow. "Me." "You remained," Nix said. "When instability emerged, you didn't retreat." Ethan shrugged. Someone had to stand still. Nix studied him for a long moment, then inclined her head. "Then you are no longer a variable." "What am I?" he asked. "A constant," she replied. Nix left them then intentionally. Orales remained at the viewport, arms folded lightly, not defensive, just thoughtful. "You were right," she said quietly. "About what?" Ethan asked. "Truth near power does not destroy it," she said. "It transforms it." He stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "And you?" She turned toward him. "I am lighter." But the admission was quiet, personal. "I should feel exposed," she continued. "Instead, I feel more present." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's what honesty does." She looked at him then, not as central command, not as a symbol, as a person. "You did not seek this role," she said. "No. And yet you are still here." "Yes." "Why?" she asked. The question wasn't political, it wasn't strategic, it was dangerous in its simplicity. Ethan took a breath. "Because you matter," he said. "Not as central command, as you." The silence that followed was different from all the others they'd shared. It didn't demand resolution. It allowed it. Orales looked away first, not from discomfort, but restraint. "We should stop here," she said quietly. "Yes," Ethan agreed. Neither of them moved. Outside, the stars continued their slow, indifferent drift. Inside, something fragile and deliberate had taken shape. And both of them knew. The final test was still coming. The final consequence did not arrive as resistance. It arrived as choice. Ethan learned that on the 8th day after the reassessment protocols went live, when a secure transmission request appeared on his private console, one that did not route through Nix, the Council, or any command layer. It came directly from Orales, not Central Command, not the symbol, her. He arrived at her private observation chamber just before the artificial night cycle dimmed the ship's lights. The stars beyond the viewport glowed softly, scattered like quiet witnesses. Orales stood with her back to him, hands resting lightly on the transparent barrier, posture relaxed in a way he had never seen during command hours. "You're early," she said. "I didn't want to be late," he replied. She turned, and for a moment he saw something unfamiliar in her expression. Resolve without armor. "I've made a decision," she said. Ethan didn't speak. He had learned when silence mattered. "The Council has proposed formalization," Orales continued. "A defined role for you, codified authority, boundaries, titles." "That sounds safe," Ethan said carefully. "Yes," she replied. "And suffocating." She stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance, not imposed but chosen. "They want to contain what you represent," she said, "to make proximity predictable again." Ethan nodded. "And you?" "I can accept it," she said. "It would stabilize the system, reduce resistance, restore familiar hierarchies." She paused. "Or," she said quietly, "I can refuse." Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle between them. Refusal meant tension, scrutiny, risk. Acceptance meant safety and the slow erosion of everything they had built. "What happens if you refuse?" he asked. Orales met his gaze. "Uncertainty becomes permanent." "And if you accept?" "Then I return to being untouchable." The word landed heavier than she intended. Ethan exhaled slowly. "You didn't bring me here to ask what's logical." "No," she said. "I brought you here to ask what's honest." He considered her then, not as a leader, not as a figure reshaping an empire, but as someone who had carried impossible weight alone for too long. "You already know what you want," he said. "Yes," she admitted. "But wanting it doesn't make it easy." He stepped closer, not crossing a boundary but standing beside her. "Then don't decide alone," he said. Her eyes softened just slightly. "That's the problem," she said. "If I choose honesty, it will be because you're here. And if you choose safety," he asked. She looked away toward the stars. "Then you won't be." The words weren't a threat, they were fact. Ethan felt the ache of it, of something fragile that had grown in the space between them, unspoken but undeniably real. "If you refuse," he said quietly, "what happens to me?" Orales didn't answer immediately. "You would no longer be protected by ambiguity," she said at last. "You would become visible." Ethan smiled faintly. "I've been visible my whole life." She studied him. "This would be different." "I know," he said. "But if staying requires you to stop being seen, truly seen, then it's not staying. It's containment." Her breath hitched, barely perceptible. "I never asked you to be brave," she said. "I never asked you to be perfect," he replied. They stood in silence then, not heavy, not tense. Full. Finally, Orales straightened. "I will refuse the Council's proposal," she said. The words were calm, decisive. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. "This will change everything," he said. "Yes," she replied, "but it will change it honestly." She turned to face him fully now. "I won't ask you to remain," she said, "not if it becomes dangerous." Ethan met her gaze steady. "I won't stay out of obligation," he said, "but I won't leave out of fear either." That was enough. Orales nodded once. Then we continue, she said, without titles, without guarantees. A soft chime echoed through the chamber. Nix, waiting respectfully at the edge of awareness. Central, Nix's voice came through. The council awaits your response. Oralis looked at Ethan one last time, before turning toward the console. This is where systems change, she said quietly. Ethan watched her, this woman who had allowed uncertainty into power, humanity into command, truth into places it had long been excluded. And he understood something with sudden clarity. He hadn't been chosen to save an empire. He had been chosen to stand beside someone while she chose herself. As Oralis transmitted her refusal, the stars beyond the viewport seemed to shift, not moving, but reframing, as if the universe itself were quietly acknowledging the decision. When it was done, she turned back to him. "It's finished," she said. Ethan shook his head gently. "No, it started." Oralis smiled, not as central command, not as something untouchable, but as someone who was no longer alone. Outside, the ship adjusted course by a fraction of a degree, barely measurable yet irreversible. And somewhere ahead, beyond mapped projections and controlled outcomes, a future waited, uncertain, unscripted, and for the first time honestly shared.